we will move on, and because I'm excited to dive into this conversation, Ranjini. I've found you to be a really thoughtful conversation partner in the past when we had you for our previous event, and then, visiting your class at the University of Toronto. That was just a wonderful experience. And I know that you have such a broad experience and understanding of so many different spiritual, religious traditions, philosophical schools. And I guess I'll let you take a little bit of an opportunity just to tell us a little bit more about yourself for those who maybe haven't come across your work yet. But I'd love to give you the opportunity to dive in and tell us why you chose the specific passage of the specific book that we're focusing on today, why you chose that. And then I think that'll be a good launching pad into the conversation to come.
Right. So I'll come to there, but I'll begin with, just a little bit about my background. So I was born in Calcutta, lived in India, lived in Kenya, studied in the US, taught in Oman and Dubai, and then immigrated to Canada about 15 years ago. I can't remember how many years. But I have had this sort of really deep interest in different spiritual traditions, which I know, Simon, you share too. And Sue Monk Kidd is one of my favorite writers, and some of you may have read her. Sweet Life of Bees is a novel that was made into a film, and it's now also a play that's been recently performed, I think, in London. I'm not sure, but and she has a memoir called Dissident Daughter, and she has other novels, Mermaid's Chair and Invention of Wings. So one of my favorites is the Book of Longings, which is her most recent novel. And the reason I chose it is that this is sort of Easter weekend. And the Book of Longings is really fascinating because it's a novel. So it's written in the fictional voice of, suppose Jesus had a wife. And so the point of view in the novel is really Anna, who is the fictional wife of Jesus. And so the novel really is very much a story. I mean, it's really the Book of Longings. It goes back to, what is Jesus's longing and what is really Anna's longing, because Anna is really the voice of the novel. And Jesus really is a secondary character. And so she's born in a time, Anna, when it was difficult for women to write, and that is something she loves to do. And so I just wanted to read a line to open the novel. I am Anna. I was the wife of Jesus ben Joseph of Nazareth. I called him beloved, and he, laughing, called me little thunder. And so it really begins completely with her voice and actually ends with her voice. And in the very first chapter, her aunt Yalta returns from Egypt, and we've heard, we know about this wonderful library that existed in Alexandria and all the study that took place there. But her aunt Yalta returns and gives her an incantation bowl. And I've actually seen an incantation bowl when I visited Emory University in Georgia, and I went to the museum there. It's beautiful. So there are these sort of spirals, and the story of the incantation bowl really is that you write your prayer in the bowl, and then you draw yourself at the bottom. And obviously, even drawing yourself at the bottom at that time was at the bottom of the bowl was considered a sin because you couldn't really create an image of yourself except God, But Anna does that. And this is her prayer at a time when really it was really hard for a woman to be a writer, for a woman to write. And she says, Lord our God, hear my prayer, the prayer of my heart. Bless the largeness inside me, no matter how I fear it. Bless my reed pens and my inks. Bless the words I write. May they be beautiful in your sight. May they be visible to eyes not yet born. When I am dust, sing these words over my bones. She was a voice. So she has this tremendous longing to be a writer. And then, of course, Jesus has his own longing to bring the kingdom of God into men's hearts, women's hearts, human beings' hearts. So so it's really about longing, and it ties in with sort of connecting to what is our own longing in life.
No, I love that. And I'm actually just going to take this opportunity to paste that passage in the comments here, just so that everybody can see that, because I guess it'd be cool to kind of pick this apart. We want to talk about, obviously, in the title of the event, we decided to go with love, purpose. Well, I'm forgetting there was one more. Love, life, and
Life,
purpose. That's
life.
right. Yes, love, life, and purpose. So, how does that come together with longing in the context of this passage as well?
Mm-hmm. So I guess one of the things that you connect to in this novel, I mean, Jesus dies at the historical Jesus dies at 33, and that's when he dies in is crucified in this book. Anna lives, and I don't want to give a spoiler, but anyway, Anna lives beyond him, and continues to write. So there's this idea, I mean, which Mary Oliver, the Canadian poet, talks about our one wild and precious life, and really what we are going to do with that one wild and precious human life. And even connecting to that and encountering it. And what I found interesting in the book is that both the characters, both Jesus and both Anna, are at conflict with their society at that time. So Anna is, she has to hide her pens and inks, and it's burned at one point by her parents, and it's something that she can't do for a long period of time, as she does what is considered a woman's work. But yet she has this longing to do something with her life. So it really connects to the fact that life is so brief, and they actually have a child that dies, a baby that dies. But this idea of just the brevity of life, the idea that what are you going to do with your life, and I think one of the key words here is a sense of largeness. Bless the largeness within me. Bless the largeness within me is really like encountering yourself and trying to see what is it that I really, really feel I want to do in my life. So we have Jesus at one point saying when he was 12 years old, he really felt this deep connection to God. And for Anna, it's the feminine face of God, it's Sophia, that she feels drawn to, and that I actually have hanging up here, but the face of Sophia. But but for both of them to actually realize what they slowly move towards, what they feel is their purpose, results in a lot of suffering. So I think what moved me about this book really is that Jesus in this book is really very human. And in a way, I've sort of grown up and I've heard stories about the crucifixion. I've, been to church and all that. But when I read the book, I found it infinitely more moving because he was so human. He was just sort of finding his path. He was finding his way, just as she was. I read, at the opening, there's a very short passage of their meeting, and I thought that was actually quite lovely when the two of them see each other for the first time. So her parents are actually betrothing her to this old man who's widowed and has two children, and she doesn't want the wedding, but it's all a business arrangement. And at that moment in the marketplace, there's Jesus and with his sister. When I looked up, I saw the young man from the yarn stall coming toward me. A tuft of red thread dangled from the sleeves of his robe. It drifted to the floor as he bent in front of me. It occurred to me he'd witnessed everything that had transpired. the argument with my mother, the transaction for my betrothal, my suffering and humiliation. He had seen. He reached out his hand, a laborer's hand, thick knuckles, calluses, his palm, a terrain of hardships. I paused before taking it, not from aversion, but fascination that he had offered it. I leaned against him the slightest bit, testing the weight on my foot. When I turned my face to his, I found my eyes almost level with his own. His beard was so close, I could, if I were bolder, nod my head and feel it graze my skin. And it surprised me that I wanted to. My heart bounded up along with an odd smelting in my thighs, as if my legs would give way once again. And so it, you know, that's, I heard a girl call out his name, Jesus, and that's their first meeting. That sort of sets it up. So he's really very human in the book, and she's very human. So when the crucifixion actually happens and you see through her eyes, to me it was really moving because you understand what it takes to follow a purpose. The Sue Monk kid really presented him the human aspect of him.
I think it's certainly really interesting to think of Jesus as somebody who was also just another human being on this path, feeling that longing, that pull towards something. And I'm also thinking of this recent lecture I listened to from Alan Watts, where he definitely more humanized Jesus, almost representing him as somebody who perhaps wasn't the way he said it was the church kicked him upstairs, meaning they kind of lifted him to this place of the highest, so that he's almost untouchable, when perhaps the message was really that we, each and every one of us, contains the exact same qualities that Jesus contained, this human and divine nature, that we are all God if we would truly see that. And instead, that was humanizing to me, this idea that he was kicked upstairs, which I think is such a beautiful way of putting it. But I wanted to ask you, Ranjini, what do you think is the difference between something like longing for a purpose in your life, or maybe an equivalent word, yearning for something, and say something like desiring or to have ambition? How do you think that we distinguish those two? It seems like there has to be a distinction, because I know that personally there are things in my life that I would say I yearn for, but then there are other things that I would say maybe I desire.
Yeah, and the word desire, I mean, is so loaded. It's loaded. The Buddhists load the sort of load that word, and so do the Stoics, Load. It carries a lot of weight with it. And in Hinduism too, there's so much about desire that. So when you use the word desire, it's almost that it's semantics, but the idea of desire is that our desire is sort of endless and it keeps us sort of trapped. So we want something and then we get it. And it's either not exactly what we want, or after a while we get habituated to it and we want something else. And so we are caught in this endless cycle of desire. And it's a good thing in the sense that it keeps you going. Like you have ambitions, you have goals, and you continue. And I think when desire becomes problematic, and often Buddhists, I mean, I've heard Thich Nhat Hanh talk about the word intention. I mean, they prefer to use the word intention because often desire can become feverish. It becomes feverish. And when our desire for something that we really want doesn't happen, because not everything is within our control, we have a lot of suffering. And so the Stoics know this really well. I mean, they use the image of the archer, the archer who sends the arrow. He's well prepared. He studies archery. He prepares. He looks out. He takes good aim. But yet, when you send out that arrow, there could be a strong gust of wind. And so the Stoics remind us of the reserve clause, that it may not happen. And so that's the difficulty really that I have desires to finish this, do that, and so forth. But I find that when so I guess what the Stoics are saying and what the Buddhists say and what the Hindus say is really dispassion. Like have 100% engagement, or as Gandhiji said, have 100%, work and engagement, and have 0% attachment to outcome, because in a sense, as the Stoics say, we can't control the outcome, so it may not happen. And so I find that if the Stoics talk about having a light desire, and that's a good thing. Like you can have a light desire for things, and I think the problem is when so for example, if you're working on a book and you worked on it for a long time, and then just no one takes it, uh, is that going to throw you into despair and self-doubt, and is that going to take away your joy of writing? That's when is it going to take away all the other happiness that you have? And I think at that point, the desire becomes feverish. And that's why the Stoics, the Hindus, everyone talks about dispassion. Because if we hold our desires more lightly, or keeping in mind the reserve clause, that basically it's our duty to work hard and to have goals and to make good use of our human life, but we cannot control the outcome. So there is that sense. In Buddhism, they say that even the Buddha respects the right time. So there's a Buddhist temple in Mississauga where I live, where there's this verse where he says that unless causes and conditions are favorable, something does not manifest. So sometimes you can do everything right. You can work really hard. You can it's a good goal. It's a worthy aspiration. And you can feel this tremendous despair, like I have a good goal, I have good motivation. Then why isn't it coming to be? That's a question that Van Gogh could have asked, right? The fact that he did 800 paintings, and the end of his life, he still wasn't recognized, and he barely had money to buy his paints and his canvas. It's a question that Scott Fitzgerald could have asked when he wrote The Great Gatsby, which today we consider one of the greatest classics of American literature, but was a failure in its time. Or Kate Chopin's The Awakening, which was considered immoral, but again is considered now as a great work. So there's so many factors in the fulfillment of our desires and in what we want. So I see the idea of a light desire, and to me, the way at least I understood longing in the Book of Longings, it's called the Book of Longings, is that it's something deep. So it's really a sense of almost a deep sense of, this is what I want to do with my life. And it manifests itself slowly. So as we see with Jesus, when he's 12 years old, he has some sense of it. It goes underground for a while. And then certain circumstances, and he hears about John the Baptist, and he goes and listens to him. And then there's a sense of that. And for Anna too, she writes, and then her writing is taken away from her. She marries Jesus. And it's very interesting that he's so poor. We never really think of how poor he is. That the Jesus that she presents in the book faces taunts because people consider that he was born out of wedlock. He's, a carpenter's son, his father, and it's all, there's a lot of poverty in that, in the atmosphere in which he grows up in. So he's a stonemason, and then he goes back to it. So the longing is something that calls us, and it often asks a lot of us to give into. There is that courage that we have to. I felt a strong, I would say about 11 years ago, I was at a meditation retreat, a very strong desire I had gone up to I was at a meditation retreat in Boulder, Colorado, and there was a stupa, and we were asked to bring our intentions in our mind, and I had much smaller desires that I want. I was thinking, I hope that works out. But when I went up there, I had just had a stronger intention, because until then, my creative writing and my literature was one stream of teaching, and my meditation was a different stream. But when I was up in that, I was sitting there at the stupa, I had the strong sense that I should bring together, and I created that course, Meditation and Writing, but I had no idea what I was doing. I just felt very strongly that that was my work. And now that work required sacrifices, financial and other things, but anyway, so that's what I did. But the first class, when I proposed it, I had no idea. But then I had a dream, and the dream sort of gave me courage. So we are really moving into, in whatever small way, I think, and how do you connect to your longing? And we'll go to that next, but it's interesting, but really connecting to our longing. And so that this one brief, precious human life, but at the same time, if we hold a longing too, with too tight a grasp, and we really want it fulfilled, and we are really unhappy if it isn't, then it's moved into, it's moved out of dispassion. It's moved into a place of suffering. And it may have also then moved into a place of ego, where we think, this is my work. Why isn't it happening? Why isn't it happening? And we're demanding something out of life instead of flowing with it.
I really appreciate all your thoughts on that. There's so much there that we can think about, and you're really helping me to understand a little bit better the differences. Because even if you think about the word longing, and I know this is kind of a cheesy takeaway from it, but it does have long in the word, and there is something that persists, I think, in the feeling of longing. It's like a desire to me seems a little bit more in the moment, or it comes and it goes very quickly, perhaps, whereas something like a longing or a yearning it seems to be something that is also linked to that word purpose. There's something, you said it was deep. It's deep within you. And I was thinking it feels as though it's almost like when there's something that so clearly matches your internal nature as a human being, and like we say, it feels as though you're being called towards a purpose. And yeah, I mean, I wonder how we, I know we've talked so much of what you're saying right now. It just reminds me of Sharon Labelle. I know that Sharon and I have often talked about, how do you heed, you know, how do you truly heed the call? And I would love for you to continue talking about those different stages. When does it become ego? How do you appropriately align yourself with your purpose or your deepest longings, so that you don't get in the way of possible progress that could be made towards those things?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to actually, but I want to read this thing
Please do.
from the Gospel of Thomas that I'd sent to you earlier, Simon. Knock upon yourself as on a door, and walk upon yourself as on a straight road. For if you walk on that road, you cannot get lost. And what you open for yourself will open. So knock upon yourself as on a door, and walk upon yourself as on a straight road. For if you walk on that road, you cannot get lost. And what you open for yourself will open. And this is from the Gospel of Thomas. So, I mean,
How do we walk
think,
upon ourselves, please?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I think, like, if you look at all spiritual traditions, there is silence, there is contemplation. So Jesus, after he's baptized by John the Baptist, goes to the desert for 40 days, and he goes alone. And actually, in this novel, Anna says, "Can I come with you?" He says, "No, I have to be alone." And then in the novel, very much a part of it is that every morning he goes to pray. He goes up to the hills and prays. Um, so in all traditions, we have this idea of contemplation and meditation, and that there is something in silence and in stillness. And what Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen monk and teacher, says, uh, that we have to find the stillness to go home to ourselves. And he says most of us have what he calls the hurry sickness. We are always busy, we are always doing, because we don't want to go home to ourselves. It's uncomfortable going home to ourselves. And so he really encourages. I remember going for a retreat with him. He passed away last year, January, but in 2013 at Brock University for a week. And he said, we're going to practice stopping. And so there was a lot of silence, and really this encouragement to go home to oneself. And so one way to go home that we've seen in all spiritual traditions, where there's a lot of, there is silence. So Gandhi had a day of silence. I mean, he was an extremely busy man, but we tell ourselves we're so busy, we can't take a day of silence. But, he was so key in India getting independence, and he took a day of silence. Every Monday was his day of silence. So there is something about contemplation and silence and stopping and being still, which can be really uncomfortable because it takes us to both places of joy and places of suffering. And so, which we don't want. And so that's I think part of knowing yourself. The meditation, the contemplation, what Socrates called know yourself. The other thing that I do is, of course, journaling. I journal every morning. Journaling is a part of, Stoic communities. Seneca and all talk about journaling. Pythagoras talks about asking yourself at the end of the day, how did I do today? What could I have done better? What did I leave out? So there's this kind of regimen of self-development and really looking at yourself, not with the eyes of judgment and self-loathing, but with the eyes of Maitri and compassion and love. And so in the morning I journal, and Julia Cameron, she says that when you journal, the snowflake pattern of your soul emerges. So I do that every day. So I self-correct. It's a process of self-inquiry. It is free writing. It is a way to let out my fears, my wishes, my thoughts, my aspirations, my dreams, whatever it is, my longings. But it's also a place where I see what I'm doing. And sometimes I'll see behaviors, words that were maybe unkind. I see sometimes blind spots in myself where I intend to be, good or kinder, and I'm not. I see things that I'm trapped by, and so it's a place of really, the journal, the pages really can be a very powerful place to encounter yourself, where you actually see who you are, and you see what you want in this one wild and precious human life. So I even look at the way I spend time. I look at the things I'm sad about. And then sometimes when I look at the things I'm sad about, I self-correct. It's because my desire has become feverish. It's slipped into ego. It's connected to outcome. So really it is. And so then I can return myself to joy in some ways through my journey. So this, Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living, right? So the idea that we examine our life, we know ourselves, there is the self-inquiry, we use wisdom, and we look at ourselves with Maitri, with loving kindness. And I think that's how we sort of, what Seneca says, right? Each day is a life. And so every day you show up in your journal. And you show up maybe on the meditation cushion or going for a mindful walk. And it's this, what is the shape of my soul? What is the shape of my longing? And Sumang Kid, in this book has a beautiful phrase where she says the longing will guide you. You know, trust the longing, it will guide you. So it may not manifest, the things we long after may not, and it often has not for me, happen in the way I want it to. The very thing that maybe I want to walk on, just the door shuts. So there is that sense of openness and flexibility. Um,
I so appreciate all your thoughts there. It's funny how, so many of the great traditions come back to this outpouring of the soul, whether it's some sort of journaling or maybe an artistic practice or some sort of creative work, things like that. And this silence, this peaceful state or this contemplation. And I just wonder how we can better make space for the compassion, the empathy for ourselves when it seems as though time and time again we arrive at certain places. I know I do this, you feel, oh great, I'm on the right path, and then you just slip back into old habits, and then you do it again, and after a while it can become really difficult to not get disheartened on this kind of path.
mm. Yeah, I think the path of self-inquiry and the path of, sort of self-reflection is in some ways also a lonely path. And I think that's why we hang on to community and we connect to other communities. But I think one of the things, the progress I've just understood is it's very incremental. It's very slow. And Thich Nhat Hanh has this beautiful meditation and these words. He says, when jealousy or suffering or anger manifests in you, you don't repress it and you don't scold it. You basically cradle it with compassion and the energy of compassion and mindfulness, like a mother cradles a child. And you say, hello, my little jealousy. Hello, my little anger. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. So we are wounded in different ways for so many things. And our experiences. So I think the idea that your journal, your meditation practice, if we do say that the divine spark, or if we don't want to use the word God, or we use the word God, or whatever, if we do want to just acknowledge that at least we are alive and there is something very beautiful in the fact that we exist, then we will learn to honor ourselves and cherish ourselves and not put these unreasonable expectations of perfection. So I may meet a writer who's way more disciplined than I am. And then I may really beat myself up, like, why am I not that? But there may be other strengths I have, which, but there is this acceptance that this is where you are on your journey. And really looking at yourself with the eyes of love and kindness. Thich Nhat Hanh has a meditation called the metta meditation, where he says, may I be peaceful, happy, and light in body and spirit. May I be peaceful, happy, and light in body and spirit. So I think that, and I think self-doubt is natural. But even if I feel self-loathing or self-doubt or whatever, I try to return myself to a place of self-love and trust, and realize that actually hanging on to these external things which you wish to happen in the world is also just being caught in samsara. It doesn't really matter. What really matters as a human being is that I try to live well, I try to use my talents, I try to be kind, I try to be compassionate, I try to be a good human being. And the Stoics would say that is a flourishing life. So I'm doing my duty as a human being. So we could say that Van Gogh, by doing his 800 paintings, was doing his duty as a human being. He was following that longing to paint paintings that no one in his time understood. And I mean, if you look at Jesus, he was clearly not understood. It's a brutal crucifixion. And maybe I'll just read this I don't know now with trigger warnings, so I'm not going to read all of that, but I just wanted to read a small passage. So when Anna returns from Egypt and she goes to Egypt for a while and she comes back, Jesus, the crucifixion has begun. I knelt beside Jesus, possessed now by an eerie calm, by a self barely known to me. Everything receded into the distance, the streets, the soldiers, the noise, the city walls, the people craning to watch, the whole pageant of horrors abating until there was nothing there but Jesus and me. His eyes were closed. He didn't move or seem to breathe. And I wondered if he was already dead. He would never know I was here, but I was relieved for him. I rolled him gently onto his side and a breath floated up. Beloved, I said, bending close. He blinked and his gaze found me. Anna, I'm here, I've come back. I'm here. A drop of blood trickled over his brow, pooling in the corner of his eye. I took the sleeve of my cloak, his cloak, and dabbed it. His eyes lingered on the red thread on my arm, the one that was there at the beginning and would be there at the end. I will not leave you, I said. Don't be afraid, he whispered. Jesus and I didn't have long. In these last minutes, what did he most want to hear? That he'd been seen and heard in this world, that he'd accomplished what he'd set out to do, that he'd loved and been loved. Your goodness will not be forgotten, I told him. Not a single act of your love will be squandered. You brought God's kingdom as you hoped. You've planted it in our hearts. He smiled, and I saw my face in the dark gold suns of his eyes. Little thunder, he said. I cupped my hands about his face. I said, how I love you. We lingered only a second longer before the centurion returned and jerked me upward. He flung me to the side of the street where I stumbled on, and it goes on. And the procession began. And and then we go to Golgotha, and the really difficult crucifixion. And then it ends with the cross. The soldiers did not tear themselves away from their game of knucklebones to chase us away. They no longer seemed to care we were there. We watched Jesus' eyes grow glassy and distant. I felt the moment come, the severing. It was gentle, like a touch on the shoulder. It is finished, Jesus said. There was a sound like a rush of wings in the blackish clouds, and I knew his spirit had left him. I imagined it like a great flock of birds, soaring, scattering, coming to rest everywhere. So it's interesting to me that what she fictionally does in the scene is that she has Anna just tell him that his purpose is achieved, that what he set out to do. But if you look at it in the eyes of the world at that time, it was a failure. The success, or what we think of it as the influence of his purpose, was only afterward. So it's a good thing to remember. In the 1960s, when Thich Nhat Hanh returned from Princeton and he went to Vietnam War, and he met with Martin Luther King while he was in the US, and he wanted, in his efforts to stop the Vietnam War, and Martin Luther King supported him, even nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. And when Thich Nhat Hanh went back to Vietnam, which he loved very much, because of his anti-war stance, his books were banned. The monastery that he had created was destroyed. His name was erased from all the Buddhist temples in Vietnam, which is very interesting. Which is, you see Jesus clashing with the church too. And then he was exiled from Vietnam and was then, went as a refugee to France. But he was exiled from Vietnam for 40 years. And he went back as an old man when he was dying and asked for permission to die at his root temple. And he was 92 years old and had a stroke, so he was no threat. But it is interesting that often, and yet we seem to want success in our lifetime, and we want to see the fulfillment of whatever we are doing in our lifetime. It can't happen. So I think really it may happen for some, but I think it's really important to just connect to our largeness, connect to what we really want, and then try to do it with dispassion.
Wow, I think that's actually such a beautiful and perfect place to maybe transition into some questions from anybody else who would like to jump in here as well. I just really want to thank you, Ranjini. This has been such a beautiful conversation so far, and now I'm really questioning why I've set my schedule up in a way today where I have to leave on the hour. this is really annoying to me. And unfortunate, but we are going to have many more conversations. But